Hello, in this video we're going to take a second look at section 5 and we are going to look at how to solve a quadratic equation. And it's a really important skill for next year. So I'm going to give you a few extra examples today. But first, take a good look at page 145 because you can read about a method how to solve a quadratic equation. I will walk you through the steps and then I will show you a few examples. Step 1. First thing you always do is see if you can solve the equation using cards. What's really important is that we did this in chapter 5 and you can find this in chapter 5 in book A and let me see. You can find this on page 147. Again, in book A, chapter 5, on page 147. But again, I will show you an example how to solve an equation by using cards. And not just any equation, a quadratic equation. Next step, step 2. If this is not possible, so we cannot use cards, then first always reduce the equation to 0. In step 3, we're going to factorize the binomial or the trinomial in the equation. And why are we doing that? Because when you are solving a quadratic equation and you cannot solve the equation by using cards, we really would like to use the rule a times b is 0. But then you have to factorize, you need to have factors, because this is only working when you multiply two things. So then you can say, well, a is 0 or b is 0. So when we cannot use cards, we're going to reduce to 0 if that is still necessary. Then we factorize the binomial or trinomial. And the last step is solving the equation by using this rule. So I'm going to give you examples of all these possibilities. So there are 5 examples and we're going to take a look at them one by one. The first one. Always first look really closely. What do we have? Maybe you could say this is a binomial because we have 2 terms. But when you take a closer look and you think, well, let me factorize this, then you will find a problem. Because when I look at both terms, can we find a common factor to divide them both by? For instance, I can divide this one by x, but this one is not possible to divide by x. Or this one can be divided by 6, but this one cannot. So it's really hard to factorize this one, even if it looks like a binomial. So but when this happens, you have to use a card. So, and this is what we did in chapter 5. I'm going to place a card over x squared. And then you take a close look at what number should be on this card. And that should be 36, because 36 minus 36 is 0. But when you look underneath the card, it's at x squared. So then you know x squared should be 36. But when we are solving an equation, I really would like to know the value of x. Not only the value of x squared, I want to know the value of x. So this has to go. So what is the opposite of squaring? And that is square root. So again, we are going to do the opposite to calculate the value of x. And then you have to calculate square root of 36. And that is 6. And now you can check if your solution is correct. Because when I fill in 6 over here, it says 6 squared. Well, and that's 36. Minus 36 is 0. So this solution is good. But there's also a second possibility. There's another number. When you square it, the solution is 36. And that is minus 6, because minus 6 times minus 6 is also 36. So again, you see there are two solutions. So this was the example showing you how to solve a quadratic equation by using cards. How can you see if you need to use cards? You can see this when there's only one term with the variable. He doesn't have a variable. So then you have to think of using cards. So let us look at the second example, example B. Well, now I can really see I cannot use cards, because when I would like to use cards, I need two cards, because the variable is over here and over there. And it's not possible to work with two cards. So this has to be solved a different way. Well, then think about method. We cannot use cards because the variable is in two terms. But then in step 2 they say if it's not possible to use cards, we're going to reduce to 0. But that is already done. So we don't need to reduce to 0 because it's already reduced to 0. So next step is take a good look if we do have a binomial or a trinomial. And this is a binomial. So I'm going to factorize, and then we have one set of brackets. Always copy the 0. Otherwise, you don't have an equation anymore. Well, then you take a good look at both terms, and both terms can be divided by the variable t. So I put them over here. Then you take a good look what should be between brackets. T times t is t squared. T times 6 is 6t. So now we've factorized. And I'm doing this because I want to use this rule. A times b is equal to 0. And the multiplication symbol is over here, but we don't write it down when we factorize. So now I can use the rule to solve the equation. And I write down t should be 0, or t plus 6 needs to be 0. And over here we have the first solution. So this one's done, this one's ready. But now I have to figure out the value of t. So the plus 6 has to go. And on both sides we will do minus 6. And there is the second solution. So this was an example for a binomial. We go to exercise C. Well, let us take a close look to this exercise C. Because the exercise, it said that we have to solve an equation. But will you take a good look? Do we have an equation over here? And the answer is no, this is not an equation because we have two variables. So this is what we call a formula. And yeah, well, there's a big difference between a formula and an equation. But we can factorize this. That is possible. So we can factorize this. This only means I'm going to write down the formula with double brackets and with factors. But it's still a formula. So, what kind of a formula? It has 3 terms. So this is a trinomial. But we cannot solve a formula. So I can only factorize. So I can write down x and x over here. Product is positive 10. And the sum is minus 7. So you have to think of two numbers. When I multiply them, the solution is positive 10. And when I add them, it's minus 7. So when you take some time to think about it, you should find minus 2 and minus 5. Let us check. Minus 2 times minus 5 is positive 10. And when I add them, minus 2 plus minus 5, I will find minus 7. So again, this is a formula. We can factorize this formula, but it's still a formula. So I cannot use the rule a times b is 0, Because there's no zero, there's a variable. So this is not an equation, it's a formula, and we can factorize it, but we cannot solve it. So this exercise, well, this is the only thing I can do, factorizing. Let us look at D, example D. Well, first, we cannot solve this by using cards because the variable is in two places. So I should use two cards, and that's not possible. So what are we going to do? Well, look at method. If it's not possible to use cards, we have to reduce to zero. So that's the first thing we're going to do. And why? Because I want to use this rule. A times B is 0. So there needs to be a 0 over here. Otherwise I cannot use this rule. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to write down a 0. So we are going to reduce to 0. And then you think about this number 5. We want it to become 0. So how can you do this? By doing minus 5. But always remember, you have to do it on the left side and on the right side. So over here, it's already done. And now I'm going to do the same on the left side. So I'm going to write down x squared minus 4x minus 5. So that was step 2, reduce the equation to 0. In step 3, it says factorize the binomial or trinomial in the equation. But always first, and that's an important step, is look if you can shorten the equation. And this equation we cannot shorten because we have 3 terms and they are not like terms. So we cannot shorten this one. But always take a good look first if you can shorten. Do not forget this step. It's not in the book, but it's really important. Well, now we see we cannot shorten this. You can answer the question, do we have a binomial or a trinomial? And this is a trinomial. And then we can factorize it. We need double brackets. Is 0. I'm going to write x over here and over there. And then you're going to look for 2 numbers. When you multiply them, it's minus 5. And when you add them, they will be minus 4. So take some time to think about this, and then you will see we need minus 5 and plus 1. And now we can solve the equation. Because x minus 5 should be 0, or x plus 1 needs to be 0. First solution will be the first solution. X will be 5 because we do plus 5 on both sides, or x will be minus 1 because we do minus 1 on both sides. So let us look at the last example, E. Again, do we have a binomial or a trinomial? First, we're going to reduce to 0. And this means we have to do minus 5x because he has to go both left and right. On the right side, we will get 0. And on the left side, we also do minus 5x. And then you see why you need to shorten, because we have 2 like terms. This is not a trinomial, you will see, because this will be x squared plus 8x minus 5x, that's 3x. And now you see why you need to shorten, and now we can factorize and solve it. So this is a binomial. We need 1 set of brackets, and both terms can be divided by x. And then you will have x plus 3. First solution, x is 0, or x plus 3 is 0. This means x should be minus 3. So we've seen a lot of examples, and you can only learn this by just doing these exercises, and look at method at page 145. Good luck with the exercises.